My name is Elisa Cooperson. I work in the Community Affairs Department at Synopsys, and we're thrilled to be sponsoring today. I also serve on the Education Committee for the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. I have served on the committee about 5 years, but Synopsys has a long-standing relationship with the leadership group dating back to the 90s. I believe our co-CEO and founder joined the board in 1999, and we're thrilled about their leadership and dedication to the education space, and we're excited to be here today. I'm just going to give you a brief introduction of our company and our work in the community, and then I'm going to welcome our panelists on stage. If you haven't heard of Synopsys, we're a B2B company, and we specialize in software design automation, making all the tools for the electronics we all love so much and use so frequently. And we also work in IP verification and security. And we're based in Mountain View, and we have about 11,000 employees worldwide. We, in our community program, focus primarily on STEM education, and we donate roughly about $2 million to educational programs worldwide, as well as programs to help the most in need. And as people were mentioning this morning, we also are really proud our employees are extremely engaged in the community with things like our days of service, our volunteer programs, as well as our Dollars for Doers and matching gift programs. Our outreach foundation specifically supports hands-on learning and science fairs. And locally, some of the ones you may have heard of would be the Synopsys Science and Technology Championship, which is otherwise known as the Santa Clara County Science Fair, and Science Palooza. So, and to date, the Outreach Foundation has provided 1.8 million hands-on science experiments to teachers and students in the Silicon Valley. So we're really thrilled about that. But now I would like to turn it over to our great panelists. So I'll be introducing them right now. To kick us off, we have Ryan J. Smith, Executive Director for Education Trust West. Marianne Dewan, Deputy Superintendent, Santa Clara County Office of Education. Tony Thurman, California State Assembly Member and candidate for State Superintendent of Public Instruction. Samantha Tran, Senior Managing Director of Education for Children Now. Rick Miller, Executive Director of Core Districts. And our moderator will be Juan Cruz, Superintendent of the Franklin McKinley School District. Thanks to you all so much for coming.
So thank you for being here this morning and engaging in important work in terms of K-12 policy. So before we get started in the questions, we want to make sure that you get a context in terms of who's here in the panel. We have a diverse stakeholders here that represent policy, that represent advocacy, and implementation. So I want to have each one of the panelists introduce themselves, 1 minute sort of introduction in regards to your role in terms of policy and or education within your organization. So we'll start off with our first panelist here, Samantha Tran.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Samantha Tran. I'm the Senior Managing Director for Education at Children Now, and Children Now is a children's advocacy organization. So we look at kids' issues, the 9 million children who are in California, 12% of the nation's population, and really try to look at the interconnected issues that touch their lives. So making sure that they're safe, that they're healthy, and that they're tomorrow's innovators, and that includes public education. So my role is to do all of our state policy and oversee our work in that area, and really looking forward to talking more about that today.
Great, thanks, Sam. Good morning. My name is Rick Miller. I'm the Executive Director of the Core Districts. Core is a collaborative of 8 of the most large districts in the state of California: Los Angeles, Long Beach, Oakland, San Francisco, Fresno, Sacramento. And we are basically the idea behind Core. The impetus behind Core is that if PLCs was a great learning moment and an important reform in education, and if teachers can work meaningfully together, why shouldn't districts meet meaningfully together? And so that's really what our idea is we regularly get together to learn from each other, to talk about what's working in our districts and how we can port good practices across our districts. We also, several years ago, you may have heard, got a waiver from the federal government around No Child Left Behind, and that allowed us actually to build a data set to share information. With a lack of a data system, a meaningful school improvement data system across California, we built one, and And so now we actually have more in the core district. We have 2 million kids as part of our data set across California trying to learn from each other and leverage the data to improve.
Good morning. Okay, we are ready to roll. My name is Tony Thurman. I represent the 15th Assembly District in the California State Assembly. Those are great cities like Richmond, Berkeley, and Oakland. Anybody? 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 All right, all right. I always get in trouble if I don't do the roll call and a shout out for my district. I'm also a candidate to serve as California's Superintendent of Public Instruction. Simply because I believe that education can work for every young person. It worked for me. I was born right here in the area where we are, to immigrant parents, to a dad who was a Vietnam vet who never returned from the war. I met my dad for the first time when I was almost 40 years old. I found him on the internet. My mom raised 4 kids by herself, and when she lost her battle to cancer, my whole life got turned around. But one thing remained constant. I got a great education. I was like many of the kids that we serve, and I want to see us do better for them. I was on the free lunch program. That's why I'm so glad that the governor just signed one of my bills that will give 400,000 more hungry kids access to the free and reduced lunch program. He just signed that bill last week. And I often think about my life circumstances very easily could have sent me to California State Prison. Instead, I'm in the California State Assembly and in a position to do more. And so we must change the narrative. We must educate and not incarcerate. And I hope that you'll learn about my new bill, AB 43, it moves money from prisons and puts it where it belongs, preschool and after-school programs, by taxing private prisons in the state of California that take $5 billion from us and give us nothing. AB 43 will direct that money to preschool and after-school programs. I look forward to our conversation today. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mary Ann Dewan, and I'm the Deputy Superintendent at the Santa Clara County Office of Education. The county offices are a unique entity in the state of California where we serve as an intermediary between school districts and the California Department of Education. And we have a unique leadership role as well, leading, convening, and bringing people together to do change work, reform, and innovation in the education space. We have 3 areas of focus. This particular year, we are a leader in the data zone and the Silicon Valley Regional Data Trust work, which I'll talk about later today. Also, yesterday, we kicked off a year-long effort to re-engage civic engagement and bring stakeholders together to expand opportunities for civic engagement, create a vision for Santa Clara County. And we're also a leader in the Strong Start Coalition, where we are advocating for expansion of access to high-quality early learning for young people in our county and throughout our state.
All right, good morning. My name is Ryan Smith. I have the honor of serving as Executive Director of an organization called the Education Trust West. Happy to be here. A couple of reasons. One, my family's from East Palo Alto, which is usually considered the valley's other side of the tracks in many ways. But to be on this side, really talking about what matters, educational equity is important. How many of us have heard about equity? Who've heard the word in the last week? Well, I'll say this. Equity is the new coconut water. It's the trend we're all talking about, right? But not all of us are really drinking. So I have the opportunity to serve as Executive Director of a civil rights organization that's dedicated to educational equity and justice, closing achievement and opportunity gaps in this generation. And our weapon of choice is not necessarily the law. Our weapon of choice is data. We are data to the people, folks. We talk about democratization of data, that data shouldn't be something that is just given to the elites, that it should be a public good that parents and communities and student members should be able to access in order to advocate and get the type of education necessary for change. So it's fascinating. We're actually a majority person of color and woman-led organization doing education research, policy, and advocacy, which is unique in the education space. And we consider ourselves a group of angelic troublemakers fighting the good fight with data in tow. So really excited to have this discussion with you this morning.
So thank you. And Superintendent of Franklin McKinney School District, and my role is to provide leadership in the implementation of policy, but also in the work of early learning. Franklin McKinney has been a leader in regards to closing the achievement gap, but by closing the opportunity gap, 0 to 5. And so we've been engaged in that work with our partners at the county, First Five, and we hope to, through that work, to be able to also influence policy, not necessarily just have policy implementers of policy. So thank you for that introduction. And I want to acknowledge that we do have our Vice Mayor of San Jose that has joined us this morning. Thank you for being here. So we're going to go ahead and start. We have a couple of questions for each of the panelists specific to their organization and the work they're doing. And we've allocated three minutes, so kind of pace yourself. We have our timekeeper up here, so they'll let you know when you're down to a minute. And I'll do my best to try and keep the conversation going, but not necessarily cut you off at mid-sentence there. So we're going to start with Samantha Tran. Children Now has advocated for the local control funding formula. How has the LCFF successfully brought about equitable student outcomes? And how does Children Now work to further the goals of LCFF and other efforts to promote equity?
So I think I'd like to start by putting LCFF in context. It's our new funding formula in California. It was passed in 2013, and I think for those of us who were involved or even tangentially involved, we knew that this was decades in the making, right? California had historically, created lots of different state-driven reforms, and all the money was going up to the state level, and it was coming back to communities in kind of a irrational way. And so the goal behind LCFF was, I would say, fourfold, four interrelated principles. One was equity. That was at the forefront. And I know, we were shoulder to shoulder with our civil rights partners to make sure that we could pursue this law, because it was about getting more resources to our most vulnerable kids, because we know that they need more in order to get that fair start that so many of us strive for them. Secondly, it was about innovation at the local level and the ability for district leaders, community partners to really respond to local needs and have the flexibility to do so. Third, it was about transparency, and that transparency was fundamentally grounded in this idea that we need to build faith in public education. We need to make sure that people understand how the resources are being spent and how kids are doing. And finally, it was about accountability. It was about making sure that kids are actually achieving at levels that are going to prepare them for college and career and life. And that first line of accountability was community, that we provided the tools to community groups and others to engage in that accountability process locally, and that the state also had a fundamental role in ensuring that we were providing that opportunity for a quality education. So 4 years later, where are we? Where do we sit on those four principles? And what I would say is that on the equity front, we have been incredibly successful in equitably distributing dollars to communities where there are high needs. So where you have school districts where there's a lot of kids who are low income and oh, I have 1 minute. What we haven't done yet, though, or where there's still this concern, is whether or not the dollars are actually getting to kids, right? And that feeds into the transparency issues. There's a lot of work that I think collectively we need to do together with our education partners and our policymakers to make sure that resources aren't just going out to communities, but then are actually penetrating down to the school site for kids. We've seen a lot of progress in terms of engagement of community, especially where you have organizing happening on the ground. And so that first line of accountability, there's some strength building, but we need more support on that front. And then the bottom line accountability at the state level, that's just now being launched. And I think it is a work in progress, and I think a lot more work that we need to do together to make sure that is actually successful for kids. So that 3 minutes went by fast.
All right. Now the next question is for Ryan, staying on the topic of what is relatively the new funding formula. Education Trust West has conducted extensive research into the LCFF implementation and other issues of educational justice. Can you give some examples of school communities that have promoted equity using LCFF or other supports or other efforts that go towards the issue of equity?
Sure. So we recently came out with a report, which is actually available online, called the Steep Road to Resource Equity, about LCFF 4 years later. And we unearthed some bright spots. In our backyard here, San Jose Unified School District thought differently about staffing. They realized that it's important that they had a effective principal, an effective educator in every school community, which is really important. But they realized that for schools that had higher gaps around, particularly amongst Black and Brown children, they need to do something differently. So they actually brought more personnel. You'll see schools with higher concentrations of low-income students, English learners, and foster youth that have more counselors, that may have another assistant principal, that even may have more teachers in order to accelerate the pace of change. We've also seen innovation when it comes to thinking about college prep courses. So there are districts like Napa Valley Unified, or districts like Riverside Unified, San Diego Unified, who've literally aligned all of their courses so that Black, Brown, and low-income students have the opportunity to take more A through G courses to be college prep eligible, which is really fantastic, really amazing. I will say that we don't see as much innovation as we thought we would see 4 years later. And I think LCFF has started an amazing conversation about equity, but we know it's about equity and outcomes that really matter. I think California is having this great conversation about the California way and what that means, given what we're seeing from the interesting administration we currently have under 45, which I think is really important. But I will say this, for California, equity has to be our North Star. Unfortunately, when we look at things like LCFF or accountability, they've started a good conversation, but we're seeing a devolution of safeguards for Black, Brown students. Instead of having more data that helps being meaningful, we're seeing less data or data obfuscation where you don't understand what's really happening. So if we're thinking about the future and we're at an inflection point, we have people like Tony running for state soup, we have a gubernatorial election coming up, we must have a real conversation about how do we get results for the majority of the students who happen to be Latino and African American and low income, who are 1 in 5 of them English learners, who are foster youth in our state. So we're beginning a good conversation, but now it's really about results.
So thank you. So let's elaborate a little bit more on this notion of data and accountability. And so the Santa Clara County Office of Education has been instrumental in developing and implementing Data Zone. So this question is for Mary Ann Duan. What is Data Zone? What is the project's goal? And what are some of the challenges involved with the implementation?
So thank you, Superintendent. Data Zone is a wonderful partnership that the county office leads in collaboration with our local school districts. I want to congratulate Franklin McKinley School District under Superintendent Juan Cruz's leadership. Data Zone is a demonstration of implementation in their school district. They were one of our first demonstration districts along with Santa Clara County or Santa Clara Unified School District. It is an education-based data warehouse that allows us to bring information in from student information systems, testing, all of the information and data sets that a school district has. We're able to bring that disparate data into the education data warehouse and then visualize that data back to teachers and administrators. It's automated data flow, and it provides rich opportunities for practitioners to make real-time educational-based decisions, to intervene early, to monitor, to have accountability, and to do educational planning. It really is core to our mission at the county office to focus on equity and access. And by having this really rich, robust system, we're able to provide teachers with the information they need to make real-time decisions for students. It does allow for individual student views as well as cohorts. We can monitor the impact of interventions that are being provided. And it's also rich enough to allow for data sharing across agencies. So one of the modules that we have in Data Zone is called Foster Vision. And with our Foster Vision app, we're able to share information with probation, with courts, with social services, to really help ensure that foster youth are receiving the services that they should be receiving, and to help monitor their progress across their placements and throughout their schooling. Another thing that Data Zone has helped us do is really focus on the responsible use of data. So we focus a lot on data sharing, data ethics, and data responsibility. So it's one thing to have access to the data, it's completely another how you use that data. One of our mantras is that we use data for social good and for improvement, and that no student, teacher, or administrator should be harmed in the use of the data warehouse. Further, the data warehouse is the hub of the Silicon Valley Regional Data Trust. And with the Data Trust Initiative, we are expanding the use of Data Zone across our region. We recently onboarded 6 districts from San Mateo County, and we're in the process of bringing Santa Cruz County on board as well.
And I'll just elaborate a little bit on that as one of the districts that is using Data Zone. As I was getting trained on how to use it with a couple of clicks, and I shared that at another panel presentation a couple months ago, I was able to identify a kindergarten student that had already 10 behavioral incidents within the first 3 months of school. And so it allowed me to find that student and immediately have staff go and find out what was going on with that student. For a 5-year-old to have 10 behavioral incidents within 3 months, there was something going on. And so with just a couple of clicks, as I was playing around with it, I was able to sort of, find that student and begin working with the family, the school, to try and provide support and intervention. So that's the real kind of implications and use that we've been able to see firsthand. So thank you.
And Superintendent, we hear stories of that changing the trajectory of young people's lives every day as a result of the Data Zone. And I would just mention 2 quick things as well. That we're expanding to develop data dashboards for our schools who work with the county on school link services, so we can look at that investment. And then also we're in partnership with First 5 to create early learning dashboards to address the 0 to 5 space and to support that alignment from early learning into kindergarten.
So we'll continue on the same theme of data. And so the next question is for Rick Miller from Core districts have also focused on data as a way to improve student performance. What are the primary objectives of the student success dashboard, and how do you see the dashboard interacting with the state and federal requirements as more districts adopt it?
Great, thanks. So let me sort of start back a little bit and be critical of the state, because it's what I do. And so CORE, as I sort of talked about, we were actually formed out of a lack of support from the state. So the state at the time was not doing what districts needed to help improve. And so districts came together to do it on their own. And I think it's really important to say when I say that CORE was founded while I was the deputy state superintendent at CDE. So the state was me, right? So it's not this administration's problem or the next administration's problem, right? So it's a fundamental structural problem in California. I would say size is a big part of it, where the state just cannot support learning for districts. It supports accountability, kind of, but not learning. And so our dashboard and our data system was inherently about learning. So we look at different measures. So we look at academic outcomes. We look at growth of students, how they actually using statistics, how they grew over the course of a year, and whether or not the school had impact on their learning. We look at social emotional learning. So we actually have a survey to look at growth mindset and self-efficacy. And we look at the culture and climate of school. Do you feel safe in the school? Do you feel supported by the teachers in the school? And we ask the the teachers, we ask the students, and we ask the parents. And when we find disconnects between what one group thinks and what another group thinks about safety, it causes us to sort of say, hey, we need to go take a look at this. And so this group learning, I think, is really sort of the direction that we need to go. What I will say, sort of going back to Sam and Ryan's talk about LCFF, is I believe it was one of the most important reforms in the last in decades in California, and it's really important that we stay the course in LCFF. It's the right direction. It's the right way to go. What I will also say is our data is showing it isn't working for the kids we intended to work for. And I would say very clearly yet. I think there needs to be time, but I think we need to recognize this. We are not closing gaps. In fact, in many cases, the gaps are expanding. It's really important to say, when I say that, to know they're expanding, everybody's improving, which is critical. All subgroups are rising, but the white subgroup is actually outpacing growth of African American and Latino subgroups. That cannot happen. It cannot happen anywhere. It certainly cannot happen in California. So we have to, as a field, have to recognize that we have to think differently, that just simply sending money down differently isn't the singular solution. And what I would actually argue, there's no policy solution. Policy can help set the framework, but this is hard, slogging work that will not be done in isolation. So it's going to demand districts and educators to work together, to learn from each other, and do long, steady work to improve. And it's critical for the future of California and the future of the country.
Thank you. This next question is for Assemblymember Thurman. Can you speak to the trends in education policy in the Assembly this year, and what do you forecast to be important issues at the state level in the coming year?
Thank you. You know, in the Assembly, we've talked about any range of issues that you probably read about every day. We talk about teacher tenure. We talk about what structures should be in place as we see the growth of charter schools. We've even had a bill that has moved through the Assembly that would change the start time of the school day to make it later and to require all districts to have a later start time, recognizing that the brain science says that teenagers, and I have a teenager, and I think it's true, that they stay up later, and so they're not always awake even when they're physically awake in the class, and that school should start later than 8:30. And so these have been some of the conversations that are taking place via bills. But I would say this, and I know that many of you are business leaders, and I hearken this, you know, how do we close the achievement gap that you heard? How do we address equity when we have a huge teacher shortage and we don't have a teacher at the head of the class? And, you know, this is a nationwide and statewide issue. And many of you who are here from the South, to me, it's like if you're in business and you're launching a new product and you don't have a product team, you don't have a salesperson to help you get into new territories, you have to have the personnel who are prepared and trained to do it. And so it's why I'm supporting two bills, and we're talking about them. One, provides scholarships to anyone who wants to enter the teaching profession. And then I've introduced a bill that's a teacher housing bill, because I know that many districts, the teachers just can't afford to live where they work. And it's for all school district employees, whether they're teachers or a custodian. You know, I look out, I see one of our school board members from Oakland in my district, and my constituent, Nina Sen. I didn't call out my school board member and my constituent. Many of our districts, even here in San Jose, there's been a big push to have teacher housing. Our bill, my bill, AB 45, would provide the funding to school districts to actually build affordable housing so that we have teachers in place to support students and deal with equity issues and the achievement gap. I think the other thing we have to do is continue to expand our STEM and computer science efforts. We have launched a statewide computer science task force. I'm the chair of our Assembly STEM committee, and I'm using that to push conversations about how we make every district in California a computer science district, pre-K through 12. There's 1.5 million jobs in coding that we have to fill by 2022. Right now, there are 2 jobs for every person who's qualified to take the jobs. And if we start working with our students in computer science and teaching them how to be makers and giving them hands-on experience and career tech and giving them the opportunity for interns and to learn, this is where our business leaders come in, we create opportunities to close the achievement gap. Students learn about coding. You know, my 14-year-old, I call her the IT department. She can work on any device that I get. As soon as I get it, she takes the instruction manual out of my hand and she shows me how to use it. It's intuitive for our kids. but yet we don't give our kids access to computer science and training that will prepare them for coding, prepare them for engineering jobs. And if they don't, for whatever reason, choose to go to college, they can earn a decent wage in coding. And so from my standpoint, more STEM, more computer science, and collaborations with businesses that will be the partners to the school districts will help us close the achievement gap, make sure all of our students are getting rigor, and make sure all of our students are being prepared for the jobs of tomorrow. Really, they're the jobs of today. They're the jobs in technology, and we need your help to make it happen. Her sign says, let it go, so I'm gonna let it go. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I just want to echo the point of the teacher shortage. And in our district, we don't normally lose teachers to other surrounding districts. Where we lose them is to outside the area. It's so expensive that our teachers that we've had for 5-6 years realize that if they are going to want to ever be homeowners, that the only way they're going to do that is by moving out of the area. So every year we lose 5, 6, 7 teachers to the Central Valley, to out of state. Last year we lost 4 teachers, special ed teachers, to Oregon. They all moved to Oregon. And so I think that is a critical issue for public education, and certainly in the Bay Area, because of just the cost of living. Most of our districts are also in declining enrollment because our families are moving out of the area. They just cannot afford to live here. And so it is a major issue for us here in the Bay Area in regards to that. So thank you for bringing that up, and looking forward to some creative solutions to address that problem. So the next question is going to be opening it up to all the panelists to speak to the primary areas of focus that could be addressed at the legislative level. This is your time, especially with Assembly Member here.
Happy to start.
I was trying not to hog the mic, but I'm happy to go.
Well, thank you. Thanks. So we opened the panel talking a bit about the benefits of the local control funding formula, and I certainly echo those, and we've seen benefits in a number of our districts. But the process, I think, is not yet complete, and I would like to see some additional effort at the state level to look at the adequacy of the funding, and also the disparate and for a district who is considered basic aid versus one who is very likely barely basic aid, and what that means and the impact on our ability to deliver services. Further, I think there's an inadequacy of funding for special education. And as you all know, the funding formula does not address special education as part of that formula. It may or may not need to, but the issue of special ed funding certainly needs to be addressed at the state level. And a passionate area of focus for me is the expansion and the ability to coordinate early care and education, both for expanded access as well as for a continuous focus on increased quality. Related to that, I think there's a need to find a unique student ID number methodology for the 0 to 5 space, and to have that link into K-12 education. Also, a kindergarten readiness assessment that would support us statewide would be really beneficial and supportive for, I think, our school districts, for our data quality, et cetera. And then lastly, to really look at state policies that would support cross-agency data sharing in ways that protect student privacy, but also allow us to do the good work we need to do for program evaluation, research and evaluation, and to be able to make more meaningful, just-in-time changes to our educational delivery.
So your very robust list took a couple of mine, but I'm going to reiterate and co-sign a part of some of those. Number one, we are the center of innovation. California is and continues to be that, except in education data systems. Florida is supposed to be the most robust education data system. When we asked them, hey, how can California get there? They responded, well, first, you guys need to get to where Alabama is. We don't know if you are so far behind, we don't think you could actually catch up to where we are right now. And there's a couple of reasons why. Right now, our current CalPADS data, our longitudinal student achievement data system, only collects what's federally required. We don't have a robust teacher tracking system. So when we talk about recruitment of STEM teachers, we need to know where they're at. When we talk about retention, we need to know where they're going. We gave money back to the federal government so that we did not create that system. We cannot currently match student records from K-12 to post-secondary. So we have no effective longitudinal data system to see if our students are even not only matriculating, but actually graduating from where they may have started in preschool. We lack the type of data necessary for change. I don't know, I've been really excited to see this little rivalry between the Washington Post and New York Times. This is a side note. But, the Washington Post has that piece around democracy dies in the dark. Well, our students' futures die in the dark if we don't have the right data necessarily to support their success. And while all the oxygen goes to what's happening with charter schools and what's happening with teachers, Black, brown, and poor students die in the middle of the conversation that is totally too polarized. So I believe data is the third way in this state. Creating effective data systems is a way to bridge the gap between a polarized field and one that we all can band together and say we should at least know how our students are doing in order to close achievement opportunity gaps in this generation. So I believe data is sexy, yes. And I believe there should be a campaign around data, yes. And I believe that is the thing many of our candidates should be talking about in order to launch California into the future.
Thank you.
I agree. Let me just build on that as a perfect example. So Ryan talked about innovation too. So CORE has done, we're not nearly far enough, but have done a lot of what Ryan has talked about. So we have significantly more data in our system than the state does by choice. We are actually connecting it to higher education by choice. We're actually connecting it to the Link Learning Alliance so we know how kids are doing for college and career readiness in high school by choice, right? So then we went recently, just a few weeks ago, to the state board. We've been trying for a year now, to the state board to say, okay, you don't have data, we do. So when you think about accountability, we actually want to use our more robust measures to think about how we hold schools accountable, because we think growth matters. We think social emotional learning matters. We think the cultural climate of school matters. You don't want the data, we have it. So call us a pilot, let us try this, let us see how it works. If we include an accountability, if it works, then the state can make an informed decision of whether they want to include the future. The state board unanimously said, nah, we don't want to try that. In fact, we had the superintendents from LA, from San Francisco, from Oakland, Sacramento, they wouldn't even meet with us to talk about it. Right? So there's a lot of conversation about local control, but the reality is there's not a lot of willingness to innovation. We have that going on, while at the exact same time, with all due respect to the state legislature, we have in Long Beach a strong desire to think about 11th grade using the SAT as their accountability mechanism in 11th grade. It makes enormous sense. It makes sense because it's a test that matters, right? So it counts for higher education, but also most importantly, right now, all we have in 11th grade is the SBAC, right? The SBAC gives you very limited information back to inform instruction, and just as in 11th grade. The SAT has a PSAT in 8th, 9th, 10th grade. You can combine it together, you can look at it, and they now have an agreement with the Khan Academy, so any student can send their SAT, PSAT to the Khan Academy. We'll give back to them a curriculum to actually help them learn where they need their help, right? This makes enormous sense. So Long Beach says, this is great, we're gonna pay for all our kids, we wanna use it. State says no, legislature says no, kills it. It makes no sense. We're building illogical systems frankly, the fix is not that hard. Now, there's a lot more to be done beyond that, but these are small steps at sort of where we're letting down kids in the process.
Well done, as always. Building on this theme, there is this pervasive dialogue at the state level of whether or not we're willing to see. Are we willing to look and see how our kids are doing? And I can't echo enough what Ryan and Rick have said. And I have to say, I love you, Marianne, because that's exactly right in terms of the policy agenda. And let me just give you a couple of data points on the why, because I think they clearly articulated the what. So let's talk about the why, right? We've got 9 million kids in California. 1 out of 2 are Latino. 1 out of 4 live in poverty. When you look at those that struggle to meet their economic needs, it's more than half, right? We've got 1 out of 4 that are currently learning English, and that's 60 languages. I think it's 40% of them are from immigrant families, and 91% of those are U.S. citizens. So that's our demographics, right? And then you look at where we're moving in terms of those demographics. In 1970, 33% of the population were kids, right? In 2030, it is projected that only 20% will be. So we have less children, and you couple that with the baby boomers who are about to retire, those lower birth rates, immigration into the state is relatively stagnant. If you didn't care about kids because you cared about kids, you better care about them because of the economy, right? Like every kid, every single one of them is going to count, right? And yet when we come to the issue of policy and politics and what we do, we don't invest and we don't shine a light, right? So you look at our investment in public education, and there's a lot of lauding happening at the state level about we're putting billions back. Well, we are, but we did it on the back of a great recession that cut public education to the bone. And we created a context where now we're at the point where we're back above that level, right? With a little bit of COLA, a little bit of growth. But we are 42 in the nation in terms of what we actually invest in our kids. And that is absolutely connected to the outcomes that we're getting. The United States as a whole trails behind other developing countries. California is at the bottom, and we have the largest gaps in achievement, right? And so that investment in public education, and I would absolutely include in that context early learning, right? And you couple with early learning that the state doesn't even have a fundamental commitment there. In public education, we know what the commitment is, right? You get 180 days, you're able to start, in TK for some, and kindergarten, and then through graduation. For early learning, we've got families who, just had a baby, and now they're trying to find quality care, and it costs the same as a UC tuition, right? And that's the beginning of their careers. These are young families, right? And so and we know the brain development, and we know that early start absolutely is critical. And so even knowing all of this, when you move to what we're actually doing for kids, we are not stepping up. And so there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of the specific work that we've talked about, but there's also this fundamental, are we going to commit to kids, and are we going to prioritize them? And every time we make a decision at the state level, are we going to ask, how does this impact children, and do we care?
All right, thank you. We're going to,
If I could, just reclaiming my time.
All right.
Reclaiming my time, if I could, only because, if you would, Mr. Facilitator, that I agree that the legislature has to do more and the state has to do more. And I agree with the conversation about data. I'm not sure if that's going to be what was the name of the campaign we're going to call it? He's going to be my new campaign manager. Once we have the data, the real question for me is, what are we going to do about it? We know, and now again, we do need the data, but there's another issue that has not been addressed. Everything that you heard from these panelists, we absolutely need. We need to be investing in dual language immersion so our students are ready to compete on a global level. We need the early education, and the legislature's been chipping away at it, doing a little bit for preschool slots, a little bit for early learning and Head Start, but we don't have a universal preschool program. The legislature has done absolutely nothing to address special education funding. The only families who get support around special education are those who know that if you get an attorney and your attorney goes to the school board, then you get something. But swaths of our students go without getting the needs met that are in their IEP, or just whatever it is that's going to support their learning needs. LCFF has been very important. But as someone who was on a school board during the Great Recession in 2008, I can tell you that LCFF has basically restored us to funding levels around 2008. And what it does is, it says, yes, prioritize students from very needy backgrounds, but it also says, we're going to give you just enough money to fill some holes, but not all of the holes, and we're going to let you decide how you're going to spend that money. As you heard, being 42nd in the nation, and some say 46th in the nation in per pupil spending, it should not surprise you that our students are performing, when we're ranked to other states, 41st in the nation. California can and must do better. We should be number one, given that we are in the seat of innovation. This is where you come in. We need your help. Our budget is structured in a way that we just haven't had the funding to invest and to change that rank from 46th in the nation in per pupil spending to a real investment in education. And we need your help to get that done. It requires a 2/3 majority in the legislature, and in most cases, it requires constitutional changes to the types of funding streams that fund our state budget and fund how we perform education. I've put together a roundtable of business groups and education leaders who are helping us figure out how to do a couple of things. One, create more STEM partnerships between tech companies and our school districts. Two, have the conversation about how we're going to actually expand funding to get us away from being 46th in the nation. And three, to help us launch a real plan to move us from being 41st in performance in the nation. In business, that would never be allowed. In business, what you would do is you'd put together a plan and you'd say, here are the goals and here are the benchmarks. Right now, California is lagging in 4th grade reading and math levels compared to other states. And so we have to put together a plan for how to move that forward. For those of you who are interested, I hope that you'll join our business roundtable and educator roundtable for how we do that. Go to tonythurman.com or talk to us after the meeting, and we'd be happy to move the equation, move the data to a place where we're actually prepared to do something about it on behalf of our kids.
So we have a few more minutes, and I want to open it up for questions from the audience. So, if
And to you,
okay.
you
That's fine.
indicated that the legislator voted against the thing, but you didn't say why. I mean, if you got 0
That's
votes-
definitely not to me. That's to my friend in my left. So let me ask. Sorry. So the question was the SAT. It died in committee, and the bill was actually to allow a pilot, to allow 5 districts around the state to pilot the use of the SAT and have it count for accountability purposes. I don't know if you know why it died in the legislature.
I didn't get to vote on it.
Okay. So
I wasn't. Who's was it, Senate or
it was
Assembly?
O'Donnell's bill, and I think it died in the Senate, but I'm not exactly sure. I just know it just died in committee. So I actually don't know other than, well, here's what I would say. What I do know from the state's board perspective, and maybe this is carried in the legislature, is that they feel that the conversations, they feel that the SBAC is a superior assessment. They feel the assessment itself is better, and I would agree. It actually is a better assessment. But if the assessment doesn't give you information back, it may be a better psychometrically assessment, but if it doesn't give you information, doesn't help you get better, it's not better. And so, and what they will say is, well, in years to come, it will be. And our argument is, well, in years to come, we'll use it. But right now, we got kids in the system, it's not helping, so let's move to SAT. And so it passed one committee in the Assembly and then died in committee, and I'm not exactly sure why, other than we don't like change much.
Yes, sir.
So to help answer your question, recruiting STEM teachers where they're at, I'll tell you where they are. They're all being laid off as soon as they turn age 50 by the companies that are our partners in this endeavor. Enormous supply of people who are subject matter experts and just need to be trained how to teach well. So it turns out to be a difficult process to go through 2 years of getting your credential, learning all that stuff. I did it, but a lot of people have asked me about it, but most of them haven't done it. That's something we should probably figure out a way to do a better job at. And since this is about policy, the S in STEM is science. And one of your other questions, what should the state be doing? The state is currently sending an amazing mixed message down to science teachers at the high school level. On the one hand, it has adopted the next generation science standards, which say there are 3 sciences: life science, earth science, and physical science, which is mostly physics with a tiny amount of chemistry. But UC, another branch of the state government, says there are only 3 sciences that will admit you into UC: chemistry, physics, and biology. I've sat through multiple meetings at multiple districts. How are we going to deal with this? We've got 2 agencies of the state government telling us what to teach, and one of them is saying we have to teach earth science, and another one is saying we have to teach chemistry. And what they're all doing, I can tell you, is they're calling courses chemistry, and they will actually be earth science. Starting next fall, all the UCs will start getting applications from students who have chemistry in their transcript, but won't actually know any chemistry. They'll know earth science, because the teachers are trying to satisfy both of these agencies of the state government. New York State, for decades, has had earth science, chemistry, biology, and physics as 4 courses, and students can take whichever ones they want, and the state university system in New York accepts all of those. So the UC system could simply add earth science to its group, whatever it is requirements. That would be one way to solve it. But at some point, the state agencies have to get together and give a consistent picture of what to tell teachers down at the working level. If, as we all agree, we want more people to get better science.
Maybe we can put you on our computer science task force group that's starting in January. Here's the scary part. The governor this year wanted to defer the task force, and we had to fight to get it to be implemented now, because every day we wait, education will fall behind the sector, and we can't afford to do so. And appreciate what you shared and your push. You know, the superintendent of public instruction serves in an ex officio capacity to the UC and CSUs, and so there's an opportunity to try and help get those systems to actually communicate with our K-12 systems, and I appreciate your push there. I think there's a lot of opportunity as well to look at how we align computer science with the A to G requirements, and when we talk about STEM, how we align STEM with the A to G requirements so that students are being prepared for all aspects of science and technology and engineering and math. And I would love to talk with you offline about your experiences. Thank you for making the transition from direct content knowledge to being a credentialed teacher and working with our kids. We'd like to figure out how to do more of that. I wish I had the easy button, but together we can figure out how to get there.
Take another question before we run out of time. Right in the back, sir. All right, so I'm hearing that everybody seems to be breaking. Any last comments from our panelists, and then we'll wrap this up? No? All right, thank you for joining us today. And we will continue the conversation. They're moving. We stay. All right. All right. Thank you.
Lisa, do you know if this mic is on all the time? Can you just say we have
Hello?
10 minutes? Can you say 10 minutes to the next?
We have 10 minutes until the next breakout session starts. Thanks.
Say,